So I'm hyperventilating a little bit. If I fall over, pick me up because I've got some things to say.
Though we adore men individually, we agree that as a group they're rather stupid.
That men are essential for procreation, but when it comes to pleasure, unnecessary.
Dinosaurs eat man. Woman inherits the earth.
Safety lights are for dudes.
Safety lights are for dudes.
Well, put some skates on. Be your own hero.
Hang in the air, Kristen.
Lord.
Please give it up for the dazzling vocal stylings of Miss Kimberly.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where we apparently just talk about how terrible men are because men won't just stop being terrible. I am Lauren Humphreys-Brooks, running the show today, and with me, as always, is Karen Peterson.
Hello. And
Kristen Lopez is, we presume, in the bag or possibly stalking Jeremy Irons or doing something like that.
This week she ran away with Pedro Pascal, so...
Oh, that's right. Happened. That's right. I forgot about that. So, yeah. So we do miss Kristen, but she will be back in August, hopefully, unless she just, elopes with Pedro Pascal, in which case... it's anyone's guess.
I mean, he is BFFs with Oscar Isaac, so I'm imagining the three of them are just going to run away together.
I'm imagining things that are a little disturbing right now. So, just a reminder, we are running a What's in the Bag contest. We are not certain whether Kristen will, in fact, be in the bag, but if that is your guess, please let us know. Just go onto our Twitter and retweet or respond to our tweets about What's in the Bag with your guess, and you'll be entered into the contest, and you can win what is in the bag. And also just a reminder that we are on Patreon and we do depend upon donations and support, and you also get fun things like pins and extra content and also the joy of getting to support women in film criticism. So you want to do that, please. And also thank you very much to our patrons who are already on there. So today, where do we want to start? Do we want to start with some of the garbage people? There's a lot of shit this week.
There is. I like getting garbage people out of the way so that we just can forget about them, but...
All right, well, let's start with a garbage person who has been around for a very, very long time and might actually, finally, maybe, possibly, be punished.
Fingers crossed.
For the things that he has definitely done. There is pretty much no question that this guy is a predator in so many different ways. R. Kelly has been indicted on new federal charges in Illinois and New York. He's been indicted on sex trafficking. I thought that this was actually just a repeat of some of the other things that he has been arrested for. His last arrest was 5 months ago. He was released on bail for sexual abuse charges in Illinois. He was arrested again on Thursday night when it looks like amazingly enough, near his home at the Trump Tower in Chicago. So I think that says a lot. It's almost it's not ironic anymore. I don't even know what that is.
No, it's just how it is now.
So the counts are federal charges. Including, child pornography, sexual abuse, 4 counts of sexual exploitation of children, 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States, and 5 counts of coercing or enticing a minor into sexual activity. I mean, these are really serious crimes, and he is being indicted in both, on federal charges in both Illinois and New York. So this is serious. This has the potential to, hopefully actually put R. Kelly in prison and at least remove him from the public eye. What do you think about this, Karen?
Oh my gosh, thank God. This is just... I really hope that he gets convicted. I think in this modern era that we're in, there's a very strong likelihood that he will be. I was reading the other day that with the charges that he's faced with just on these federal charges, not even including the other ones that he's already waiting for trial on, he's looking at a minimum of 15 years if he gets convicted. So, I mean, this is bad for him. This is really bad. And that means this is very good for the rest of us. The fact that he gets arrested on federal sex trafficking charges near Trump Tower in the same week that we find out about Epstein is a little weird, but I'm not going to say that's who his conspirator is. But, you know, I mean, everybody ties together, right?
I mean, you do kind of wonder, because there's been all this conversation about Epstein and about, you know, who he's going to, as that case proceeds, what this is going to mean for all of the many very powerful men who have been involved with him in various capacities over the years, including Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And so that's been sort of an open question, and people have been wondering about that. So it is interesting that R. Kelly is, you know, finally being brought up on federal charges. And I mean, we have to remember, these kinds of charges and accusations against R. Kelly have been around for years. They've been around
since the 90s.
Yeah. And so this has taken, you know, at least 20 years to get to a point where this man is actually being arrested and indicted and on very credible and very serious charges. Mm-hmm. So I just hope that this is finally what gets him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it needs to, because he has been dropped by his label, he's been dropped by his agents, he's been dropped by all these people. But if they can't get him convicted, then he's going to end up getting those people back, or at least some version of them, where people are going to be like, well, I guess we'll still work with you, because for whatever reason, people still like him. I don't know, even before I ever knew anything about him, whenever I would hear his voice, just something about him just creeped me out. Even though, I mean, sure, he's talented, but I just have never felt right about him. I don't know what it is. Well, I guess I do know what it is. I have pretty good instincts for this, but yeah, I for one am glad to see him go. He needs to be where he cannot hurt people anymore.
Yeah, and hopefully this will also scare and put the fear of God into some of the other very high-profile men who've behaved like this. Because R. Kelly is not the only one. He's one of the worst. Mm-hmm. But he's not the only one.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what I've been thinking about this week is the fact that we haven't heard from Rowan Farrow in a while. And he has said that he was working on something big. And I know he wasn't working on this one because he would have been out with a big story. But it's like, ooh, is this leading towards something else from him? Who else is about to go down? Yeah.
Well, it will be interesting. So, fuck you, R. Kelly. We hope that you go to jail for a very long time.
Bye-bye.
So, let's switch slightly to not garbage people, but kind of crappy stuff that is going on right now. Look Who's Talking is getting a reboot. And, you know, so everyone's being like, okay, fine, Look Who's Talking is getting a reboot. They're rebooting everything, basically. But if those who don't know, Look Who's Talking was originally directed by Amy Heckerling. And this new Look Who's Talking is going to be directed by a dude. Jeremy Gerlich is set to write and direct. And his major hit, his major claim to fame is The Wedding Singer, which was in or The Wedding Ringer, I'm sorry.
Yeah, not The Wedding Singer.
I looked at that and I was like, that was The Wedding Singer? And I was like, no, that can't be right. The Wedding Ringer. So the budget version, basically.
Right.
So I think that this is only really interesting and important. I don't give a shit about a reboot of Look Who's Talking. I enjoy the first film. It seems like it's kind of a passé idea. I don't know why they're going to do it again. But, again, we've got this original film made by a female director that was, should be praised for its focus on female experience in a pregnancy that is unintended. And kind of the choices that she makes about her relationships after that. And it's being rebooted and going to be directed and written by a man. And this is just yet another in the long line of things that we are tired of and that we thought that Hollywood was maybe beginning to learn from, but apparently not. So what are your feelings about this, Karen?
Oh, you know my feelings for sure.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw this, I was just like, what the fuck? I'm so tired of this. And Although I will say, this time when I pointed it out on Twitter, I didn't get the blowback. But every time before this that one of these situations has happened, either a sequel or a remake, where the first one was done by a woman and then the next one's done by a man, every time I've pointed it out, dudes come out and say, oh no, that doesn't happen. You're thinking of one or two rare cases. And I'm like, no, it happens all the damn time. And luckily, this time when I said that, nobody called me out and said I was wrong, because I think now they realize that I'm right, because I point this out whenever I see it. But yeah, I haven't watched the original in years, but I still love it. I remember seeing it in the theater a couple of times, and one of the things that does make it special, like you already pointed out, is the fact that this is about a woman. It's a very of its time movie, because it's about a woman who is in an affair with a married man, and she gets pregnant, and she has to figure out how to face this unplanned pregnancy by herself in a world where that still wasn't something that was just normal and celebrated. It was very, that was a very big deal at the time. And then it's her dealing with that, but also just like going through her own emotional stuff. This is a story that needed to be told by a woman, and was. And so to read this outline, or the synopsis of what the new director is planning on doing, and he's talking about how like he was inspired because of his own kids. He's a dad with 4 kids, and I'm just like, you're completely missing what the original movie's point really was. So I'm not interested in this, and I don't imagine, I'm sure it's going to be a completely new story with the same idea, but being told from a male perspective, regardless of who the parent is that is the focus of the movie, it's another one of those things where it's like you're just erasing those original ideas and what made that so special, unique, and important at the time. And this is I agree that whenever a remake is coming, it doesn't erase the original movie, but it does mean that the next generation's not going to watch it. And that's where I just get really frustrated.
Yeah, I do love I love Look Who's Talking. I really enjoyed it back in it was one of those films that I like kept on going back to. It was like a comfort movie almost.
Yeah.
Because it's very funny and it's sweet and it has a happy ending. You have all of that kind of niceness to it. And I have to say, John Travolta and Kirstie Alley are really charming together.
Oh, they are so charming together. Yes.
It's kind of at an interesting point in both of their careers when they're both still like very interesting actors and everything. And I never knew, because I was a kid when it came out, and it was just something I didn't really pay attention to, but I never knew that it was directed by a woman. Very similar to one of my favorite films as a child was Wayne's World, which was also directed by a woman. And I've come to realize how many of those films from that period of my growing up were actually made by women, and from, maybe if not necessarily directly from female perspectives. Look Who's Talking is more from a female perspective. Wayne's World obviously is not. But there's still that difference in having a woman directing or having a woman writing the script that just approaches these things in a slightly different way to the way that dudes do. And one of the quotes that Gerlich gave was that everyone can relate to babies. And that to me is just, it's just like, okay, I don't know what that means. Like, what? How am I to understand that?
I have questions, but I don't really care to ask them of him.
Exactly. And you do have to say, Look Who's Talking Too, which came out in 1990, was also directed by Amy Heckerling.
Yeah.
So for once, this was actually a franchise that was primarily helmed by a woman and directed by a woman. And it has its problems and everything, and definitely the films fall off in quality after the first one, which is sort of to be expected. But it feels so insulting to just to not even appear to consider putting a female director in there to direct a film that is about having kids and about experiencing that. I don't know if this film is going to wind up approaching the whole pregnancy aspect of it, which is a large part of the original movie, is like it starts with her getting pregnant.
Yeah.
And her having to deal with this asshole of a boyfriend who's married, and there are all kinds of issues that go along with that. But yeah, it's depressing, and it's just sort of another in the long line of films that we've talked about numerous times, of men taking over franchises or concepts that were originated by women.
Exactly. And I mean, we do see this all the time. One of the things that gets me with this one is that I get the sense that this wasn't even something the studio was necessarily looking for. This guy, Gerlich, however you say it, he was just like, hey, I have a great idea, I want to make this movie. And they just kind of went, okay, done, And it's like, did they even ever consider whether he was the right one for it, or did they just let him because he was, he came in with the idea, and so they said, sure, you can direct that. And the thing that gets me is, if that's the case, how often do they actually do that with women? If a female director comes in and says, hey, we should make this movie, and they say, okay, but we're going to have this guy direct it,
No, exactly. I was actually thinking about this the other day, just in terms of the types of films that we tend to talk about as women's films. And so the types of films that for a very long time women were allowed to direct or allowed to write, and they are films like Look Who's Talking, the romantic comedies, basically, light movies. But now it's, we've reached a point where it's like men are allowed to direct women's films. Men are allowed to direct men's films. Women might get to direct, quote, men's films, but they have to fight for it, and they have to constantly fight for it. And men still get to direct women's films. So there's still this inherent sexism that women, even though things are improving in Hollywood, women still seem to be an afterthought. Women creatives are an afterthought. Or they're used as symbols, but the men are actually the ones that are trying to control things and the ones that are driving things.
Yeah.
Which transitions very nicely into yet another thing that came out this week. Big Little Lies. This was a report that came out in IndieWire surrounding the Big Little Lies Season 2. And the fact that creative control has basically been taken away from the director that they hired to do Season 2, Andrea Arnold, who's a very well-known filmmaker who did Fish Tank and most recently American Honey. And according to the IndieWire article, a number of sources say that there was a shift in late 2018 where basically the show was taken away from Arnold and creative control was given back to the original Season 1 director, Jean-Marc Vallée. And the idea behind this, or the excuse behind this, was that they wanted the same visual style of Season 1 to transfer over to Season 2, which in its own sense is understandable, but then of course you raise the question, why did you hire this fairly well-known and big-name female director if the whole intention was to simply let the original creative director redo everything that she did? According to the report, this sounds like that Arnold did not realize that this was going to happen, but that this was actually always part of the plan from the show's producer David E. Kelley and Vallée, that they were always going to take away the creative control from her, and that essentially he was going to redo a large portion of the series in order to, quote, unify it with the original season. And this kind of feeds into some of the criticism that has been levied right now at Big Little Lies Season 2, that there's like weird cuts, there's odd movement between characters, there are odd directorial decisions that just don't make sense on screen. And some of the reason behind this might be that what you've basically got is one director's vision then being sort of molded by another director. It's a really, really ugly thing that is going on right now. So I don't know. I don't watch Big Little Lies, but it seems like such a horrible thing to hire this big name female director for a show that is about women and that is focused on all of these different female characters. And then to just be like, oh, by the way, we're going to take away all of the creative control that you had over this show and just remake it in our own image.
Yeah, I do watch the show. I've been actually pretty obsessed with it. And this is such a frustrating thing because I remember the first season was awesome. It was really well done. There were things, though, that I would have loved to have seen changed. And I don't want to give anything away story-wise, but the way that the first season resolves, there was nothing that specifically built to the actual resolution to it. And I was very confused. I mean, not confused by what happened, but why it happened. And when I was talking to some of my friends afterwards, they said, oh, well, this whole thing is addressed in the book, and it makes so much more sense in the book. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know why they didn't do that for the show then, because that would have been great. And so I really think part of it was just because it was this very talented male director, Jean-Marc Vallée, who just didn't understand that by extracting this one major part of the character development, that it kind of just changed the meaning of the entire story. But it was still really good and really compelling, and I really liked it the first season. When season 2 was happening, when they announced it, he went on record saying that he didn't think there should be a season 2. The first season was based on one book. It was just a limited series. They only intended to do that one. It was just, 10 episodes telling this story from this book. And he was like, no, we shouldn't do it. And they went ahead anyway. The author of the book was just like, yeah, I can write more story. I can come up with more of where this goes. And she's getting HBO money. Why would she say no to that, right? So when they hired Andrea Arnold, it was like, yes, awesome. They're going to have a woman tell the rest of the story, or the next part of this story, and hopefully correct some of those issues that happened in season 1. And so as I've been watching this season, we're 5 episodes in now, and a lot of it I've been really into, but there have been some things where, as I've been talking with friends about kind of our speculation about who certain characters are, what motivations are, where this is going, the way some people are talking to each other, I'm like, this still feels just like season 1. I don't see a difference between Vallée and Arnold at all. And now I understand why. Somehow, even though he went all public about we shouldn't do a season 2 and I'm not going to be involved in it, and he was busy with other projects, they still managed to bring him in. And that's so frustrating. I'm at this point now where I'm like, I'm hooked. I'm invested. I want to know where this goes. But at the same time, I'm like, fuck this. I'm pissed and I want to stop watching. But no, I can't because they've sucked me in. So I don't know what to do.
It's a weird situation. It basically sounds like that Arnold was brought in to fill a gap because Vallée was shooting Sharp Objects. And then when he finished, it was
wasn't very good, by the way.
And then, I think some people argue with you about that, but maybe so. And then after he was finished, they were like, oh, okay, well, we got the original guy back, and you're just kind of secondary. And so it's, at best, it's ugly. Go on.
And to do that and not tell her, that's the thing. Like, to just do that behind her back, to do it is bad enough. But then to go and take everything, let her finish all that work, because she had the episodes locked. At least she thought they were locked. And then to go and just send them off and have them recut, re-edited, have things changed, and not tell her that was going to happen. I don't know at what point she found out, but she certainly didn't know this before she was done with her work. And that's just so mind-blowing that they would do that to her, and it's so angering. I'm pissed. I'm super pissed. Yesterday, I think it was April Wolf, she tweeted, and I had already been thinking of it, but I was like, I couldn't get to Twitter, so I hadn't said it yet, but she was like, release the Arnold cut, and I was like, yes. Oh, it's so great, because I do want to see it, because like last week there's this whole confrontation between Meryl Streep and Reese Witherspoon, which those two as antagonists are so funny. I never knew how much I needed that matchup. And they had released I think it was Reese. This is what's also weird is Reese Witherspoon's a producer on the show, and so is Nicole Kidman. So I don't know at what point they knew any of this was going on, but she had released a picture during production, like a photo still of her throwing an ice cream cone at Meryl.
Yeah, I saw those.
And I was like, I was with everyone. We were waiting for that scene because that confrontation happened in last week's episode, and we were waiting for that ice cream throw, and then it just cuts and we're like, wait, what? What the hell? And it never happened, and now we know why. And it just makes me wonder how much more just really great stuff is just missing because Arnold's vision was changed.
Well, exactly. I mean, it sounds like that she had, as far as she knew, that she had in filming pretty much total creative control over how she was going to film things. And the IndieWire article mentions that, Kelly's soapy scripts featuring many scenes of two characters sitting across a table talking were not Arnold's bread and butter, but the director was free to shoot them as she saw fit. So you've got, and I think that that's an interesting conversation then to have about the difference in directorial style. Two characters talking across a table, right? That's not inherently exciting. Right? But the way that the director chooses to film those conversations can make it exciting, it can make it interesting, and it definitely changes depending upon what director you're talking about. So that visual style is different. And if you then have one director's work and then another director is coming in and either reshooting it or recutting it and rearranging some of that, or cutting it out entirely, cutting out something like the ice cream throwing scene, right? You're constructing a different story, and you're giving a different impression to what the original director did. So it's really disappointing and really upsetting that she would be given so much freedom in being able to shoot the way that she wanted to. Probably with the producers and the writers and everybody standing in the background going like, well, we know that we're going to, change all of that. That it almost doesn't matter how she films it because we're just going to fix it in post. And that's what's really upsetting about this. And there's sources that are saying that Arnold is really heartbroken over this. It's an unattractive thing for them to do, and it also again carries a different valence when you have a male director and a male writer stepping in and being like, okay, now we're going to, thanks for doing the work, now we're going to make it ours, to a female director. So it's disappointing. It certainly makes me not really want to watch Big Little Lies, unfortunately, and I was sort of interested in it up until now. And Arnold was actually a major sort of moment. I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. Maybe that's something that I would be interested in watching. And now I'm like, no, not really. Not if you're going to screw around like that.
Yeah, and I totally get where you're coming from, because that's where I'm at. It's like, I'm totally invested in the show. I'm hooked, but now I don't know what to do. Because it's like, I feel like I'm complicit if I continue to support it. But at the same time, I'm like so drawn into the story. How do I just quit now? I feel like I'm totally stuck. And it's really, it pisses me off. Because now you're also toying with the audience.
Yeah, you've brought the audience in with one expectation, and then you're giving them something else. And that's not fair either. So there's also, and the article doesn't mention this, but I do think that there's an undercurrent here of using her, not just in terms of the shooting, but using her as a name. She's a named female director. This is not an unknown. This is not someone who, particularly in indie cinema, and particularly in a lot of the people who would watch Big Little Lies and who watch HBO on a regular basis. So having her as a named female director, as sort of the face almost of the production, and being like, oh, isn't this cool? And then to actually just take away all of that creative control also makes it look like that it was almost nothing more than a PR move. Like, oh, we've got a female director, isn't this nice? But actually it doesn't mean anything. She's being treated as a token. I don't know if that's what they were thinking, but that's certainly what it looks like to me as an outsider. Mm-hmm. So it's really disappointing. Yes, release the Arnold cut. I am willing to go with that. Let's have that replace the whole Snyder Cut discussion.
Yeah. exactly.
So, speaking of things, I don't know, speaking of series that maybe shouldn't be watched, trying to find a nice transition to this. Peter Farrelly. I know that you have feelings on this, Karen, so I'm just going to introduce it really quickly and let you talk about it, because I took one look at it and just went, oh my god, no, leave me alone. So Peter Farrelly is about to start making a comedy series at Quibi, which is a short-form video platform, and it's expanding to a comedy slate with a new series called The Now, which is, I'm just going to read what the synopsis is, because I don't know how else to describe this in a nicer way. The story of a guy who is about to commit suicide when he finds out from his nagging mother that his brother just committed suicide, and his dad committed suicide in the past too. He can't kill himself because he can't do that to his mom, so he has to learn to live life for today in the now. So what are your feelings about that, Karen?
Okay, I want to be very clear that there is a difference between saying something can't be made and saying that it shouldn't.
Yes.
Because some people, earlier this week when I tweeted about this, some people were like, you're favoring censorship, and no, I'm not. I'm thinking Peter Farrelly should have the decency to realize this is a bad fucking idea and not do it. That's what I'm saying. Trying to think how to talk about this, because this is some part of why I've become very sensitive to this issue is because suicide has touched my life. I've been to 4 funerals in the last couple of years of people that have committed suicide. This is an epidemic that's on the rise. Just this year, one of my very best friends that I've known since middle school, she's gone now, and so that experience doesn't make me just like more sensitive to it exactly. It just makes me realize how we have portrayed suicide in the media and what's going on. And so when I see a headline that talks about a suicide comedy, it's not, oh, boo-hoo, I miss my friend and I'm so sad and now I'm triggered. No, it's not that. It makes me, because I lost my friend, because I've seen other people lose their parents, it's made me realize, like, this is a conversation that we need to be taking a little more seriously. And you can do that through comedy and humor, sure, but you have to be very careful how you do it. And so when I went beyond the headline and read the article that you just were addressing, and I read the synopsis, it made me even more concerned, because I don't feel like I don't get the sense and it couldn't possibly be because of Farrelly's other filmography, but I don't get the sense that he's being sensitive to this really epidemic that we're facing in this country, where suicide is on the rise. It's something that is affecting so many people, and it's like, if you're going to tell a story like this and you want to make it a comedy, there needs to be something about it that it needs to have positive messaging, positive influence. And I'm not saying that he won't, but just the way that the show is described. If they don't know a better way to describe it, then, well, he's not going through with it because of his nagging mother.
Yeah.
I've got issues. I'm sorry, I do. And I see so many of these things, you know, and there's a difference between having a suicide as like kind of the catalyst of a story and seeing how that affects other people, or even like in the case of, say, Little Miss Sunshine, where that movie opens with Steve Carell's character in the hospital being released after he has made an attempt, and his experiences kind of really strongly inform his character and some of the things that happen throughout his part of that story. There are ways to do it sensitively, and ways to do it that are thought-provoking and interesting. But I don't trust Peter Farrelly to do that, and I'm very concerned about this, and I'm very concerned about the way people just jumped on me when I expressed a concern. And we need to stop doing that, you know? We need to really take a look at the way that we're providing entertainment, the way that we're consuming entertainment, and the way that we talk about entertainment. I have concerns about all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I said this online, and I'm going to say it again. I completely agree with you. And I think that the crux of this story is both, as you're saying, the synopsis and also Peter Farrelly, because as I mentioned on Twitter, and as a lot of people mentioned, this is the guy who solved racism by making fried chicken jokes.
Yeah.
And that his filmography, and you just look at any of the films that he has made, either by himself or with his brother, there is nothing there that says this is going to be treated in a nuanced and sensitive way. And I agree with you. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at, I mean, it's difficult to say looking at suicide as comedic, because it's not comedic. It's one of the most tragic things that can happen. But, you can approach it from the point of view of comedy. Someone who's that depressed, someone who tries to kill themselves. What does that mean? How do we understand that? And I think that you can deal with that in a comedic way, and you can find some humor in it and find some sort of catharsis in talking about it. But it has, like you're saying, it has to be done by someone that knows what they're talking about and someone who is capable of that. And I absolutely do not believe Peter Farrelly is capable of it. The further disturbing thing, I think, about the synopsis to me was that it looked like yet another one of those kind of concepts that suicide is inherently selfish, and that he does it not because he doesn't want to kill himself or because he chooses not to kill himself, but because his mom nags him not to. He can't do that to his mom, so he's not going to be selfish. And there's a really disturbing undercurrent to that completely ignores some of the conversations that we've had publicly about suicide and about the rise of suicide in the United States. And particularly about the rise of suicide with men. Men are more likely, like straight men are more likely to kill themselves now more than ever. And that's something that has been discussed publicly. That is something that has been debated. And it's like, what is the nature of the culture that this is, that there's so many men that are attempting suicide or actually succeeding in killing themselves. That's a conversation that needs to be had. And there's no reason why we can't have that comically, but also seriously. But Farrelly isn't going to do it, and not based upon a synopsis of this show. And as you say, that's not censorship. That's actually raising concerns about the way that a very sensitive and very important topic is being presented. It's similar in the same way to the way that people were talking about Confederacy, the show that the Game of Thrones showrunners were going to make about what if the Confederacy won the Civil War. And everyone was like, okay, it's not just that there's a problem with the concept, there's also a problem with the people who are proposing the concept.
Right.
Other people can possibly make this show, other people could possibly make it interesting, but not in this format.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to consider who is the one that's making this art, who is the one that's telling this story, and what is their motivation?
Yeah.
That's my concern. Why does he want to tell this story? Why does Peter Farrelly think a comedy about a guy deciding not to commit suicide? Why does he feel like he's the right person to tell that story? And I mean, maybe it has touched his life. I'm sure there are a lot of people that it has been part of their experience. But I have a lot of questions. Not necessarily wanting answers to them from him, but But the other concern I have is one it's pretty simple, and this story came out just a week after I had raised concerns about Midsummer and the way that graphically depicts suicide, and there's no warning for it. I had no idea that was coming, and all of a sudden I see this, and I'm not someone that is easily triggered by things, and so I wasn't. It's not like it just, it didn't affect me the same way that I know it would affect a lot of other people in my circle, to see that without any warning, without knowing that was coming. And so my thing is that I think the MPAA should be putting warnings on that. So having that happen in Midsummer and then this article come out this week, it made me very aware that, even though suicide is on the rise and we see all these horrifying statistics, there's still so many people in the media who just don't understand what showing that or talking about it so casually does to people. Because when someone is suicidal, any conversation about it or depiction of it, like things that you would never imagine you would consider yourself doing, start to sound very like, yeah, okay, it starts to sound like something that isn't horrifying anymore. It sounds like a way out. And so it's like, that's something that we just have to be really careful of. So all this stuff just keeps coming up about suicide, and I just want people to really be mindful of how they're talking about it and how they're depicting it, and those conversations that are happening.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting that there are so many shows and so many films that are actually dealing with this. And it's the kind of thing that has come up in various forms over the course of film and television history. But one of the shows that people immediately went to when they were talking about this Farrelly show was 13 Reasons Why, which was heavily criticized.
Yeah. For
the way that it depicted suicide, for the way that it treated suicidal teens. And all kinds of other stuff also. But you would think that at some point the powers that be, as it were, would actually interrogate, okay, look at why people are having these kinds of responses to this particular topic. And how, and it's not saying, again, that you're not allowed to depict suicide, but how are you depicting it? And as you're saying, does the MPAA rate films? I mean, the MPAA has reached a point where it's rating films for, teenagers smoking. Mm-hmm. But we're not getting a rating as saying, like, there's nothing wrong with sticking on Midsummer as part of the rating depictions of suicide. And then a person like you or like me or anyone else can make a choice. Okay, am I okay going into that, or is that something that I want to avoid? It shouldn't have to solely be by word of mouth. And if we're that concerned about how many times you say fuck in a movie or how many times someone lights a cigarette, then we really should be concerned about, if you're showing someone killing themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting, just as an offshoot of this, and we'll move on, but last night, for the first time, I watched Heathers. Which I knew very little about when I went into it, and then I was watching it and I was like, holy shit. That's a disturbing movie in 1988. It's a good film, and I think that it has a lot of good stuff in it. But it's a disturbing film in 1988. It is almost impossible in 2019. And it was interesting in watching it just to think about, if you remade this film in 2019, I don't know if you could get away with it. It might be interesting. It might be an interesting thing to attempt, but Christ.
Well, I think it was Paramount TV attempted to make a TV show about it. They actually have episodes, and I think the first one eventually aired. But yeah, this was turned into a television show this year, or maybe it was last year, maybe it was 2018, and they actually were supposed to have the premiere and had to pull it because it was the week that Parkland happened.
I remember this, now that you're saying that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like, yeah, this does not work now. We can't have this as entertainment, in 2019.
I mean,
and
it could produce an interesting conversation. It would have to be handled in a really different
way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. I remember a year or two ago, someone else had discovered Heathers, the movie, for the first time with Winona Ryder and Christian Slater, and was just so shocked that nobody made a big deal about this in 1988. And I'm like, you really think this wasn't controversial when it came out just because you never heard of it? Like, oh yeah, this movie was a huge deal. I wasn't allowed to see it because of the themes and stuff. I was in junior high. My mom would not let me go watch it. It wasn't until I was in high school and my friend and I snuck and rented it at Blockbuster. We got to finally see this movie because it was a big deal. It's very controversial, and it was back then too. So,
I mean,
yeah.
it is deeply dark. And I was talking with my parents about it, and they were like, "Oh, 1988 was that? Like, when was Columbine?" And I was like, "Columbine's 1999. I remember Columbine."
Yeah.
And all of that stuff. It's just it's interesting to look at just from a historical perspective. But yeah, I was like, wow, you could not get away with this today. Like I don't think you should probably.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's also one of those things I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad that they did do it when they did, because I think that it does introduce some very interesting things, particularly the way girls treat each other, and then the way that they seek refuge from really terrible men sometimes, and like those kinds of themes. I think that leads to some really interesting conversations that have nothing to do with the murders, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating film. I was not prepared for it in the correct way. I don't think, but I liked it. I liked it a lot. Like I was just like, holy shit, this is not exactly what I expected. Okay, changing my mind space a little bit, and now I'm all right.
And somehow, even with that movie, I had a massive crush on Christian Slater.
Oh, he is very sexy in that. Like
he's so sexy, but so terrifying.
He's horrible. He's horrible, but that's part of it. I mean, you get why she's into him. You get why he presents such an attractive alternative.
Exactly.
Especially compared with everybody else in that school. So moving on to, talking about things that may not possibly age well, Aziz Ansari. Aziz Ansari is going on a comeback tour, and he has a Netflix special out, and some of this special, actually addresses the sexual misconduct allegations. I don't know whether we call it sexual assault. It kind of is. It kind of isn't. It's a very gray and thorny issue. We've talked about Ansari before on this podcast.
Out of all the people that we've discussed as garbage people, his is definitely the most gray area, I would say. And
it highlights, I think, some of the issues that a lot of people are dealing with right now in the Me Too era, and what behavior we consider assault, what we simply consider bad behavior, and how we sort of navigate that. So, I have not watched Ansari's Netflix special. I didn't like Ansari before the allegations. I really don't like him now. You have. So what are you wanted to discuss, like, what has not aged well, and whether or not we can support comebacks like this.
Well, yeah, so there are a couple of separate things that have all come up this week that this actually kind of highlighted for me, but I had not intended to watch the special. I never have been a fan of his, and I mean, I think that his situation is one that I don't know if he necessarily should be canceled over it, but I'm not a fan, and I'm not going to be now. But my coworker was telling me about some of the things that he brought up in the special, and it's only an hour long, so I thought, what the hell, I'll watch it. So I did. And, I mean, to say that he addresses what happened to him is very generous, I think, because he doesn't come out right and say, this was the situation and this is what happened, but he does talk about how it affected him in the sense of making him reevaluate how he interacts with people, how he conducts himself, and the fact that he has learned to be very grateful for the things that he has, because he has seen now through his own personal experience that it could all be over tomorrow. But he doesn't do that in a way where he's ever blaming her. He's not trying to seem like he thinks that she did anything wrong in this situation. And in fact, he even says that he felt really terrible for her. And so he's not trying to excuse it. He's not trying to say, oh, this was no big deal, or this was blown out of proportion, or whatever. He totally contextualizes it to the fact that it has made him become very introspective. And so I appreciated that. And I thought that him talking about that, and he brings up different aspects of it, different facets of it, a couple of times throughout the hour. So for that, it's like, I think in his situation, he's definitely got fans. I mean, those audiences of his are sold out all the time. So, I mean, people still are big fans of his. I think in his case, I think that, well, really what I think is that more people, if they're actually sorry for what has happened or what they have done, this is how you apologize for it, is the way that he did in this show. First of all, you sit there and say, like, wow, I really did screw up or I really was terrible in that situation. I am committed to making myself a better person. And he actually talks in a couple of different times about how if you consider yourself the same person that you were 10 years ago, then you're a shitty person because you're not taking time. Our whole point as we go through life is that we're constantly improving, we're constantly learning and doing better. And we shouldn't be the same people that we were 10 years ago because that's not how it's supposed to work. So I appreciated that. Sort of a separate topic, I guess. This actually, I saw a tweet a day or two ago about Veronica Mars, which was a show that was on in 2004-ish. It was on for 3 seasons, then it got canceled because of low viewership. Came back a few years later as a movie that was crowdsourced through Kickstarter. Actually a movie that was in theaters, and then now there's a new season that Hulu is developing. Well, has developed, and it's going to be on in a week or two on Hulu. And so this person that was tweeting was expressing her concern because all of her friends have said, oh, this show has aged really well. And she went and watched it. She'd never watched it before, and she was horrified by some of the depictions of race and racial politics and racial issues as in the first few episodes of the first season, and she was just like, this show's terrible. And I got to thinking about that, and then putting that in the context of some of the things that Ansari talks about in his Netflix show. I just thought this would be an interesting topic of conversation because we see this all the time. Even shows from just a couple of years ago, in the Me Too era, we see like, oh, wow, that's really problematic. Yeah. And so we've talked about this before a few times as far as like classic films, but, does this mean that if a show now wouldn't work, that we just have to cancel it? We just can't watch it anymore. And that's kind of where I wanted to direct the conversation.
Yeah, I think that just in terms of Ansari is an interesting issue because one of the issues that I had with him when the sexual misconduct stuff came out was the way that he had presented himself on shows like The Master of None, and just in general in like his persona as being the woke dude, right? The guy who's the titular nice guy, right? And he had presented himself very effectively as very sort of, introspective about that and not, the guy who is actually not a nice guy TM, but a nice guy. And all of that, and then finding out that, he behaves in very much the same way that a lot of not nice guys behave. Whether or not that's sexual assault or not, but it's definitely problematic. And so obviously in his personal life, was not fulfilling the promise of his persona, which isn't surprising, but is disappointing, and does begin to make you question, okay, how are you presenting yourself? And you, of all people, should have recognized your own behavior, but you didn't. And rather than actually, and I'm glad to hear that he's sort of owned up to it and is trying to improve himself and all that. I think that is important because someone like him this is very different from an R. Kelly. Yeah. So someone like him should strive to be a better person. Hell, R. Kelly should strive to be a better person. Whether or not we ever listen to his music again is an open question, but he should become a better human being. But someone like Ansari, who is actually has the possibility of growth and of continuing his career and everything like that. So when it comes to then, if you're looking back at his TV show, or if you're looking back on other shows that have had, like you're saying, like Veronica Mars, that have had not great representations of certain things, this is where my anti-auteur theory self comes out, my death of the author person comes out, because I do think that you need to read these things, first of all, within a historical context. And you cannot apply the same concepts that we're talking about right now to films that were made 50 years ago. Although you can definitely, and I think that we should discuss the issues that are present in those shows, to say like, okay, this show has a really problematic representation of race. Let's talk about it. And let's talk about the influence that it has had and how we deal with it. And certainly there are some shows that have aged worse than others. Again, talking about shows that I haven't really watched, I have not really watched Veronica Mars, so I can't particularly speak to that. But TV shows like Friends, which have very, very questionable representations of the relationship between men and women, with sexuality, with race. I mean, I don't know how these people managed to live in New York and meet like one black person. All of that stuff, and those things have been criticized. Those things were criticized about the show when it was on. Yeah. And they've continued to be criticized about the show and have been raised as issues to address. Does that mean that you then ignore the influence that the show has had or the good things that it does? You know, if it fucks up race representation, does it do better with gender representation? Does it actually succeed as comedy, even though you have these problematic elements to it? And so I think that we always need to have a nuanced perspective on things like that. We cannot cancel all past media because it was insufficiently woke. We just can't, because that's going to mean canceling the entirety of history. And that does mean that you're ignoring it. You're ignoring the history of cinema, you're ignoring the history of television, and you're ignoring the way that these things were represented. And that has its own detrimental effect on the way that on the films and TV shows that get produced now, and on the way that we approach these issues now. So no, you have to watch those things. If you're going to talk about them, you have to watch them, and even if you wind up not liking it, you still have to discuss it. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, well, and I think it's totally valid to look at a show and say, well, wow, this was really problematic in its representation of women. It was really problematic in the way that they present these racial relations and things. Yeah, it's totally valid to criticize that, but you also have to contextualize it. Yeah. Is this something that was very much in line with other things that are happening at that time and other shows, or is this something that was an outlier that, wow, why did this get to be popular when it was so terrible and didn't match anything else that was coming out in the era, you know, that kind of thing. And Ansari even talks about Parks and Rec, which was just on a couple years ago, and he talks about an episode where his character gives a teddy bear to Rashida Jones's character, but it has a nanny cam in it. And the way that it plays out in the episode is he's just like, ooh, I get to see in her apartment. But he's talking about this in his special, and he's talking about like, whoa, if I got handed that script now, I would say, I can't do this. This is a lawsuit. Like, this is bad. This is really, really bad. But that doesn't mean that you just don't watch Parks and Rec because that happened, you know? And I think it's important to watch. You know, we've talked about this before with film. It's important to watch those things, and it's important to understand the context and understand the history and where it falls in history, because that part of the reason is because that informs where we're going, how we got to where we are, where we're headed, and the changes that we have made and the changes that we still need to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Okay, so let's move on. I don't know if I'm going to ask this question. This is a bizarre question.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep on going. Okay, so reviews. I'm going to start out because I really want to say something. I have been watching a bunch of films at Fantasia Fest, some of which I'm apparently not allowed to talk about yet, even though they've been shown at other festivals. But there are definitely a couple of films that are going to be showing at Fantasia Fest that you really need to keep an eye out for, because they're excellent, and they're things that we've talked about actually on this podcast before, and that Karen and Kristen have insisted that I watch, and they were 100% right. So the review...
We kind of know you a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. The review of that particular film will be coming up just as soon as the embargo lifts for Fantasia. Two films that I've recently seen and that I can talk about are Sadako, which is a new sequel to the Ring franchise. It's to the Japanese version of the Ring franchise, make that clear. And it's actually the return of the original series director, Hideo Nakata, who comes back and if you remember the story behind The Ring, which changes depending upon which films you're watching, but it's this particular film is focused on the Wraith, Sadako, who crawls out of the television set in the original film, and is kind of the ghost that haunts all of the different films and curses the videotape and everything. I liked the film. It's not as good as the original films, and I think that it fails in actually, one of the elements of the story is that it's about a YouTube sensation who decides that he is going to investigate the case of a burned out apartment, a fire in an apartment, where a mother was killed. And of course, as we all know, there's plenty of information that this is going to result in some kind of a curse. But one of the issues that I had with it is that that's one strand of the plot, and there's another strand of the plot that deals with the daughter of the woman who was killed in the burned out apartment and her being cared for in a mental hospital. And so there are these two strands that do come together, but that don't come together in a way that I think was particularly satisfying. And it completely drops the ball in terms of dealing with viral video. The Ring, as a story, is perfectly suited for viral video. It's a great idea, a cursed video in the day of autoplay. Like, that's a fantastic concept, but somehow the film doesn't actually address that in any deep way, and I think it loses a lot as a result of that. So it's fine if you're a fan of J-horror, if you're a fan of the Ring cycle, but or the Ring trilogy franchise, whatever we're up to now. But it was disappointing to me. The other film that I wanted to pimp for is The Deeper You Dig, which is a micro-budgeted horror film that has a very straightforward plot. It is about a teenage girl who is accidentally killed on the road by a drunk driver, and he, in a panic, hides her body. And her mother begins looking for her, both in this world and in the next world. So it's a pretty standard horror narrative, but the cinematography is amazing. The performances are amazing. It was directed by the three people who also star in it, who are a family, mother, father, and a teenage daughter. And for me, as someone who is from upstate New York, it perfectly captures the existential despair that is upstate New York in February. So I really enjoyed it. It is very worth the time. It's been compared by myself and by several other people to The Black Coat's Daughter, which is another horror film set in upstate New York, and is very much worth your time if you get a chance to see it at Fantasia, or if you get a chance to just find it somewhere. I really hope that it gets picked up by... It's perfect for someplace like the Shudder streaming service. To actually get it an audience, because it is a micro-budgeted film. This is not going to be a big blockbuster or anything, but it's really worth the time if you can seek it out. It is a very different approach to what is a particularly familiar story. So those are the two that I wanted to pimp for. Karen, totally switching gears. You saw The Lion King, or the remake of The Lion King.
Yes. The not live action Lion King. I actually had the opportunity to go to the premiere this week, which was a crazy experience, and I can't believe they actually let me in the door. I kept thinking they're going to kick me out at any minute, right? But for some reason they didn't. But Jon Favreau introduced the movie, and he actually said everything in it is 100% artistry. It's all done on computers, it's all drawn, it's all painted. Except for one shot. But he wouldn't say which one. So, of course, you watch the entire movie trying to guess which one is real, and it's, impossible to figure out. I think I know, but I'm not sure.
Is it post-credit sequence? Like, the lions appear in post-credits or something?
It might be, actually. I don't know. But if it's the scene I think it is, it actually happens somewhere in the middle. But, anyway, here's the thing. I think that The Lion King is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. It's so gorgeous. The artwork is really spectacular. And what they can do with animation these days is both amazing and also terrifying, because it's at the point now where you can basically just make anything look real and nobody's going to know the difference pretty soon, which that's very scary. But as a remake of the original 1994 film, I think that there's a lot that this does not do well. And that's unfortunate. They have so many opportunities to do really great stuff, and I think that it just kind of falls a little flat. For one thing, I think a lot of the emotion is missing from this. They do a really nice job of developing that relationship and bond between father and son with Mufasa and Simba. But I didn't think that Scar was nearly as menacing as the Jeremy Irons one is, and which was weird to me. But at the same time, Chiwetel Ejiofor, he does the voice of Scar in this one. He does do some things where he's just more beguiling, so it's like easy to get kind of caught up in what he's saying and to believe him. But it does mean that scenes like the Be Prepared scene where he's stirring up the hyenas, it ends up falling flat. It's not that well done. And that's a great villain song in the original movie. And in this one, it's just like, it's okay. He doesn't even really sing most of it, which was disappointing. I think most of the lyrics are there, but a lot of them are spoken, which was just weird. And then someone else pointed out, for some reason I didn't even notice it when I was watching. Maybe I kind of vaguely did, but I didn't really pay attention to it. But someone else pointed out that Can You Feel the Love Tonight starts out during the day. And I was like, oh yeah, it totally does. That's funny. But let me tell you, Beyonce, biggest stunt casting I've seen probably ever.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's no reason for her to be in that movie. They didn't expand Nala enough to make it interesting. They tried to do more with the lionesses, but it falls and ends up being, in some ways that I won't give away right now, a little bit more regressive than the original version, which was a little weird. But I also have to say, I'm going to end on something very positive. Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen as Timon and Pumbaa are so fantastic and so funny. I never knew that I needed a sassier Timon, because
wow.
Yeah. He is so great and so just like Kristen, actually, we were talking yesterday. She used the word nihilistic, and I was like, yep, that's the right word. That's exactly.
A nihilistic meerkat. Okay.
Yes, he's so great. And I seriously, I need a Laurel and Hardy type, Abbott and Costello type series of movies starring Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen. I never knew I wanted that, but now I do. So, there you go. The Lion King. It'll be out next week. If you like really pretty movies, this definitely will not disappoint, and I would recommend seeing it for that. But if you are going in hoping that the story is improved upon at all, it's definitely not.
Yeah, everything that you're saying does not surprise me, and is sort of in keeping what I expected. But I'm glad to know that it's a pretty film. That's good.
So pretty. Yeah, it's stunning. It's stunningly beautiful. But it's funny too, because this is another one of those things where you just lose so much on Twitter, and people just don't, and also people just are not using critical thinking anymore. But my instant reaction the night I saw it was, wow, that is one of the most beautiful films ever made. And people just assumed that meant I loved the movie, and not one and even in my comments to other people, even in my comments on that, not one single person ever stopped to say, but did you like it? And I was very deliberate in not saying that I liked it, and nobody noticed. And it's just, that's because we just don't think that way anymore, you know? If it's pretty, I must think it's amazing.
I admit that when I saw that tweet, I was like, oh no, she liked it. That was my first, and then I was like, oh, maybe she didn't. Maybe it's just like a really pretty movie. But
that was,
yeah.
It was a very superficial tweet on purpose.
It's very pretty. It
is very pretty.
And there's something to be said for that. I hope, maybe they'll use that kind of technology to produce some more interesting original films.
Well, I was thinking about that, because afterwards I ran into the Disney press rep out here that we work with a lot, and I told him that it was beautiful, but that I spend a lot of the movie just still wondering. Like, I never saw it answer the question of why it needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, it's done because we have this technology, and look at how amazing they can make this look now. And at first, when I walked away from that conversation, I thought, well, that was a really weird answer. And it just felt like a very incomplete answer. But the more I thought about it, the more, I came to accept what he was saying. And I think that when you use this technology to retell a story that everyone knows and everyone has, well, a lot of kids now haven't seen it, but, us growing up, we saw this movie a bunch of times. We know it really well. And so when you see an image like Simba stepping into his father's paw print, that the original image is burned into your brain. You can see like how that looks now compared to the original. And so I think when you use that technology to retell old stories that people are very familiar with, it really does make it very clear how far the technology has come. And then, like you say, I hope that now they will use it. Now that they've shown us this is what we can do, now they'll use that technology to tell original stories.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think that's the major question about, why is this needed? It's not so much that the technology is awesome, and it's awesome that they can make something like this. But it would be great to see a story that we don't know, that is new, or that is, an adaptation that Disney of a fairy tale, or in the case of The Lion King, a Shakespeare play, that they haven't done. Let's have, I don't know, Macbeth with chimpanzees or something like that.
Ooh, that could be fun.
I think, actually, Macbeth with chimpanzees, I was joking there, but I was like, that would actually be a good movie.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
All right, someone get me Disney on the phone.
So, yes, mark that down. Macbeth with chimpanzees. It is not as crazy as it sounds. Money, Disney.
It actually would make a lot of sense if you know anything about chimpanzees.
Exactly. On that note...
Well, I just also want to throw a quick plug. The Farewell is in limited release this week. It's from A24. It stars Awkwafina, and it was directed by Lulu Wang, whose previous film was called Posthumous, which was a comedy that I think is available to rent on Prime, but it's not streaming for free anywhere. But I recommend that one too. But anyway, The Farewell, it premiered at Sundance. It's played a few other places, and it's this really lovely family drama with humor in it. About a Chinese family that gets together to say goodbye to grandma, except for that she doesn't know that she has a terminal illness, and which is a very common part of Chinese culture. And it's just a really lovely film, and I highly recommend it. It's going into wider release next week, so if it's playing anywhere near you, check it out, because it's really good.
Yes, I will back that up as well. It is a really good film, and it deserves attention. It deserves some good box office. It's gotten great reviews. It would be great to actually see those translate into audiences.
Yes.
So yes, go see The Farewell. So I think that's going to close us out. So what do you have on tap for this week, Karen?
I am headed to Comic-Con.
Are you gonna stalk Tom Cruise?
Well, now there are some questions about whether he's actually there or not, because originally I read that Paramount was doing a whole slate with Terminator and Top Gun, and I freaked out and was like, what? But now they're only talking about Terminator, so I'm not sure.
Oh dear. Well, I hope that your dream comes true, whatever that is.
Thank you.
And this week I'm still covering Fantasia, so I'm pretty much not seeing anything else, although I might take myself out and either go see Midsummer or Crawl.
Knowing you the way I do, I think you would enjoy Crawl a lot more.
See, that's the thing. Anyways, yeah, so that might be what I wind up doing this week, but we'll see. We are off next week because you are at Comic-Con and I get a Saturday off, so that'll be fun.
Yay!
But we will be back the week after, and of course you can follow all of our adventures on Twitter at Citizen Damepod. You can follow us on Instagram also at Citizen Dame Pod. If you are still on Facebook, you have not decided that you hate Mark Zuckerberg now. We are also there on Facebook on Facebook.com/Citizen Dame. You can email us if you have questions, concerns, complaints. Though we generally just delete the complaints because we don't care. On email at citizendamepod@gmail.com. Of course, our website is citizendamepod.com, where you can read my coverage of Fantasia Fest. You can read reviews. Kristen has her review of Midsummer up there. I think she's going to be having some more reviews in the coming week as well.
I'm going to write a full review of The Lion King, too.
And Karen is going to write a full review of The Lion King, so you can watch for that. You can learn about how much she loves that movie and thinks that it's just the greatest film that Disney has ever made. You can also give us some of your money. We love money. To support the podcast, obviously, on patreon.com/citizendame. And you also get stuff if you do that. You get pins and shout-outs and some exclusive content, and it's fun. And you also get bragging rights to say that you are supporting a feminist film podcast, which is the most important thing. You can also buy some of our merchandise at zazzle.com/citizendame. And if you want to give us just a few bucks without committing yourself to anything, go on to our Ko-Fi. That's ko-fi.com/citizendame. We are also on Twitter. All of us are on Twitter. Kristen is at journeys_film. I am at LH Business. Karen, where are you?
I am at Karen M. Peterson.
And so that's going to close us out for today. We will see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Bye.